Start with Why by Simon Sinek. Full summary. Let's get started. There are 3 key lessons in this book: the difference between leadership and authority, the law of diffusion of innovation, and the celery test. But in order to understand those, first we need to take a look at what Simon calls the golden circle, as it builds the foundation for the rest of these rules. In the center of the golden circle, you have your why. Outside of profit, why does your company exist? What do you stand for? What is your purpose? Then you have your how. The company needs to figure out in what way they will fulfill their purpose. For a good example of a how and a why, we can look at the mission statement of Tesla. In it, Elon Musk says, "Our goal when we created Tesla a decade ago was the same as it is today, to accelerate the advent of sustainable transport by bringing compelling mass-market electric cars to market as soon as possible." The first part of that statement, to accelerate the advent of sustainable transport, that's the big why. The second part, by bringing compelling mass-market electric cars to market as soon as possible, that's the how. And how far we've come. We're at the final ring of the golden circle, the what. The what is the easiest part to understand. Tesla is an electric car company, but that's not all they do. They're also the only car company that has its own charger network. They sell grid solutions, solar panels, and even an electric semi. All of these whats serve their how and their why. Whew, that was a lot to talk about. Let's move on to leadership versus authority. Now, Simon has a definition of leadership that I felt was a complete breath of fresh air, so I wanted to share it. He says, "Leadership is not about power or authority. Leadership is decidedly more human. Being a leader requires one thing and one thing only: followers. A follower is someone who volunteers to go where you are going. They choose to go, not because they have to, not because they were incentivized to, not because they were threatened to, but because they want to." Isn't that nice? Now contrast that with your boss looking over your shoulder, telling you exactly what to do. He's not necessarily a bad guy, but he just doesn't seem to trust you, even with small things. That's because he's using authority, not leadership. But what does leadership look like in a big company? Remember that circle from before? Well, Simon suggests that it's also a cone. You just have to look at it a little bit differently. Let's compare this to the standard structure of a company. At the top, you have your CEO. In a great company, the CEO embodies the why. He protects the vision and the purpose of the company, always keeping them on track. With the vision set by the CEO, senior management's job is to figure out how to execute it. They communicate to the rank-and-file employees, who understand why they do what they do. They know they aren't just laying bricks, they're building a cathedral. The beauty of this approach is that the CEO doesn't need to know how to do everything. He or she just needs to communicate the company's purpose. When I read about this concept of leadership, it reminded me a lot of No Rules Rules by Reed Hastings and Aaron Meyer. In that book, there's a passage that describes the difference between leading with context versus leading with control. When leading with context, employees are given as much information as possible. Then they are trusted to make decisions for themselves. That power helps them grow into better leaders later. Unfortunately, leading with control is far more common. The boss has to approve everything, and they tell you what to do and when to do it. They check in frequently to make sure everything is going smoothly, and there is no concept of trust. Leadership doesn't just apply within an organization. It also dictates how the market perceives a company and its products. Simon introduces us to the law of diffusion of innovation. It organizes the market into a bell curve. There are 4 major categories of people. The innovators are the 2.5% with bright ideas. Then you have the early adopters, the people who stand in line for hours to be the first to have that product. Then there's the majority, And then finally, your laggards. And finally, your laggards. So why is this important? Most companies want the biggest piece of the pie, so they go after the majority. These guys right here. And they're great and all, but you'll have to work hard to convince them to buy your product. Alternatively, companies that truly succeed appeal to the early adopters, not the mainstream majority. It's hard and expensive to appeal to a very broad audience. Early adopters are already looking for the next best thing though. They're willing to look past small defects or an enormous price if they can be the first to experience your product. If you focus on the early adopters, they will help you tip the scale for the majority. They won't do it out of loyalty for you. They'll do it because they're excited about the project for themselves. If you need an example of an early adopter, Marques Brownlee, otherwise known as MKPhD, is the perfect example. The Apple Vision Pro only came out a month ago, and he's already made 4 full-length videos about it. In those videos, he's putting on the headset, showing his audience what it looks like, and talking about all the possibilities and future he sees for the device. The last thing on our list to cover is the celery test. Let's say you get a new coworker, and when you meet them they tell you, "Oh yeah, I'm a total health nut, I never skip leg day." But then you go to the welcome party, and there are 2 choices, cookies and a big bowl of celery. If they start chomping into the celery, you wouldn't be surprised, it makes total sense. But what if they take the cookies? You're going to start to reevaluate everything they said to you, and suddenly you're wondering if you can really trust this person. What you do should reflect and reinforce your why. To explain this point, Simon references the time Volkswagen introduced a new vehicle that did not fit their why. The Volkswagen Phaeton. Am I saying that right?
Phaeton.
You see, from its inception, Volkswagen was all about giving the average person access to quality transportation options. So when they introduced a new luxury car to compete with the likes of Mercedes, it didn't make sense. Even though the car was very good, few people actually bought one. In effect, the celery test is Simon's version of actions speak louder than words. Thank you for joining me for the inaugural month of Busy Book Club. I really enjoyed reading Start With Why by Simon Sinek. Stay tuned for the next video where I'll let you know the March book of the month.